Okay, so hello, beautiful people. How are you all doing? My name is Ayo, and I am back again with another video. I know I've been gone for a little minute, but hey, hello, I'm back. So today we're going to be going over high yield ethics topics. Okay, I hope by the end of this video you'll understand what to look for, how to study ethics. Also, if you want to know where I'm getting this information from, I'm gonna go to the page here. So the NASW Code of Ethics, the what's it called? The book. So let me see. Let me share this tab as well. So here, right? If you want to go and see the NASW Code of Ethics, you can come here, right? They have um a free version that people can go to, right? So you just go to socialworkers.org about ethics, and then you can go through. Also, if you don't want to read it here, then they have it where you can buy and purchase the code of ethics. Also, if you are a newer student or a newer social worker, usually your school has a copy. They'll like send you out a PDF or something like that. So if you don't want to pay for it, maybe reach out to your school, your social work department, to see if they have a PDF version, and then you can use it that way. What I recommend for folks who are trying to understand their code of ethics is to use this app called Speechify. They have a free version, and what you can do, you can put PDFs in it, and then it will read the words to you, right? And it can be really easy. So you can listen to it while you're driving, listen to it while you're cleaning, listen to it while you're just chilling, right? Because the code of ethics is so important for this exam. If you don't know your code of ethics, if you have never read your code of ethics, it's going to be really difficult for you to pass the exam. So I say that to say, like, especially for the clinical exam, you need to make sure you know your code of ethics. So we're going to go over some high yield topics, and I'll try to give examples to make it easy for people to understand. But let's get right into it. Okay. Again, a reminder: if I talk too fast, just reduce the speed. So first, so the foundation of like the exam and the social work ethics is these core principles, right? So service, social justice, dignity, worth of a person, importance of human relationships, and integrity and competence. Okay, the questions a lot of times are surrounded around these principles, right? And so let's give an example. A lot of times questions will talk about, hey, the social worker has a new client, and the client has a big trauma history, and you have no training or expertise in trauma. What should the social worker do, right? So if it's a client that you are just seeing for the first time, you haven't established any kind of relationship, the best thing that you should do is to refer them to a specialist that can help them. Now, if you have a question where it says it's a client that you've built rapport with and you've been seeing them for months, and they just disclose like a big trauma history, right? Now, this is where you got to see, what should I do? We don't ever want to abandon clients, okay? You need to remember that, right? That is very important for this exam. We don't ever want to abandon clients. So if we don't want to abandon clients, what should we do? Right? So that may look like, if you are a clinical social worker, you got to get consultation and training, right, to help you be able to help your client. But then also you got to let the client know that this is not an area of specialty for you, right? Or on the other hand, if you are a master's level social worker and associate level social worker, you will be getting what? Supervision. So supervision and consultation are different things, right? And I've seen questions where they try to trip people up and people don't know what to answer. So we get supervision when we are associate licensed. When we're associate licensed, the decisions that we make not only can impact us, but also our supervisor, right? So not only are we liable, but so is our supervisor. So supervision will look like, hey, going to my supervisor, telling them, hey, this is what's going on, and they will direct us on what to do, right? Consultation, we are 100% liable for whatever choice that we choose to make, right? We're just consulting with an expert in the field, someone who has a lot more experience in this thing. So in those situations, right, when we are fully licensed, we get consultation. When we are associate licensed, we get supervision. So I hope you all remember that. Next, let's see what other times do they kind of talk about principles. Oh, social justice, that comes up a lot, right? So there'll be questions where they'll talk about like a Medicaid program, and the people that you serve, they are no longer able to afford housing, right? What should the social worker do? So the answers would be around like advocating and, saying it's wrong or trying to change policy or something like that. That's where like social justice comes in. Okay, so you want to make sure that you not only know what the ethical principles are, but also see what they look like in questions. Another one, integrity. So that will look like a social worker, let's say, billing for things that they are not doing, right? That doesn't show integrity. That's very unethical, right? You're lying. You're not a trustworthy person. You're billing for things that you don't know. So you want to just be very familiar with the ethical principles and think about how they will show up in questions. So ways to remember these. When I was studying, I was just like, okay, what are things that go together? So SNS, right? Service and justice. Then I, importance of human relations, integrity, and then competence and dignity of worth of a person. That's just how I remembered it. I was like, okay, two S's, two I's, and then a D, and then a C. That's how I remembered it. You got to figure out a way that it works for you. Okay. So let's see. Next. So here, when it comes to ethical decision making, it's the same like when we talk about like micro questions, when it's like safety always comes first, right? We want to protect the client's life, right? Protect the client's life and others, right? Another important thing that you want to think about when it comes to ethical decision making is your client's self-autonomy and self-determination. Okay. That is so important in these questions. They will trick you. I have seen so many hospital social work questions where they'll talk about a client comes in and they're refusing treatment, but their children wants them to get treatment. What should the social worker do? One thing I want y'all to understand is that as social workers, we're not there to persuade. We're not there to encourage people to do anything. We're there to help them make informed decisions, right? So we want to give them all the information and respect whatever they choose for themselves. If a person doesn't have any kind of cognitive delays or any kind of issues like that, we have to respect them, right? So if their children wants them to do something, but they don't want to do it and they don't have any kind of cognitive impairment, we have to respect that, okay? Also, I remember I seen a question before where it had a older person living in a trailer, and the daughter was very afraid, like, "Oh, my dad should not be living in the trailer." But in the trailer, he had heat, he had food, he had water. It was connected to a post, right, that he could get all the things he needed. And as a social worker, we just got to let them know, like, we got to respect what your dad wants. So you want to remember that, right? When you're answering questions, you want to see what are they trying to test me on. I think if you can think about it like that, it's going to be a lot easier for you to answer the question, right? If they're trying to test to see if you understand integrity in the social work practice, if they're trying to see if you understand competence in a social work practice, it's going to be really easy for you to answer the question. Something I want to always think about, you don't want to choose the nice answer. You want to choose the most ethically sound answer, right? That's what you want to do every single time. Don't get questions wrong because you're trying to be nice. Our job is not to be nice. Our job is to be ethical, right? We have principles that we need to follow. So you want to make sure when you're answering the questions, you are doing that. Okay. Confidentiality, so important. This is such a big part of the exam. They want to see, do you understand when we're supposed to break confidentiality and when we have privileged communication? So for example, right, we can break confidentiality if it is to prevent a serious or foreseeable harm for a person or someone else, when we see abuse or neglect of a vulnerable person, or when we get court orders, right? So let's go with the first one. If we have a client telling us, hey, I just wish all my classmates were gone, right? We're not going to report that. We need to monitor that. We can't report that. But if we have a client telling us, hey, at 10 p.m., Bobby is done, I'm going to X, Y, and Z him, right? Whoa, we need to make sure we get all the information. And if our client is telling us that they're going to commit a crime in terms of homicide, we got to report. We got a duty to warn, right? We have to do that. Okay, so when it comes to duty to warn, you have to have a person, place, like it has to be a plan. Like your client is telling you, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z at Johnny at 10 p.m. after work. Yeah, we got to warn. Okay, so then let's see. Sorry. Okay. So then what else? Abuse and neglect, right? So these kind of questions, when it comes to children, older adults, or those who have any kind of disabilities, we have to report abuse and neglect, right? The test tries to see, do you know what that looks like? So you want to remember when it comes to making any kind of APS or CPS reports, we don't have to have We don't have to do the investigation, right? We just need to have suspicion that something's going on. So suspicion will look like, let's say we have a client, or let's say we have a student in our school, and they come to us and they look not groomed, right? They've been stealing food. Um, their grades have dropped since their uncle has moved in with them. That's we need to report that, okay? 150%. Also, too, with these kind of questions, what you want to do is, if the question tells you that you got secondhand information, we always need to go back and assess for ourselves. We don't want to take the word of a teacher, right? If a teacher comes and says, hey, I think Billy's being abused, cool, they told us that, now we need to meet with Billy, right? Versus, let's say if Billy tells us X, Y, and Z is going on, then we can report that. Also, too, if a parent tells us, hey, I've been beating my kid with a switch, we need to report that, okay? 150%. What else? When it comes to older adults, if you have the child of the older adult telling you that, hey, I tie my mom up onto the bed when I go to work because I don't have anyone to watch her and she has dementia and I gotta make sure she's safe. Whoa, can't do that. Abuse. You cannot tie up your mom to the bed when you're not home, right? Or if you talk to someone and they tell you, hey, I just leave my mom home for 12 hours while I'm out, right? And they have dementia. Abuse. We need to report that, right? So you just want to know what that looks like in a question stem. If you have the direct information, right? The child is telling you, you see it with yourself, right? You see abuse, marks and stuff on the child, and when you try to talk to the child, they don't want to answer you. They're not looking at you. Abuse, right? So you or neglect. So you want to make sure you know how to report that. Okay, so to be clear, if you have the information yourself, right? Not a teacher goes to you and tells you, but if you talk to Johnny yourself, you saw it with your own eyes, you can make a report. If you get information from a teacher or someone else, now you want to go and talk to the child to confirm whatever it is, right? You don't need to say, you don't need to do a full CPS investigation, but you need to make sure like, hey, I got that direct information myself. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Next, court orders. So here, if you get a court order by a judge to say, hey, I need this information, we want to release the most minimal amount of information as possible. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes the court will say, no, give me everything. So with those kind of situations, if the question talks about, hey, get legal advice, that's always going to be a good answer, right? When it comes to these kind of things, getting legal advice, always a good answer. But now a lot of times you won't see answers like that. So if it's court ordered and the court says, no, we need to send it, then we need to send it, right? We don't have to call our client to tell them that that the court is saying that we need to send it. But what we do need to do, right, when it comes to any kind of these court things, we need to have written release of information on file for folks, okay, right? So, for example, if your client, right, is in a court case with like a divorce case, right, and you get a subpoena by a lawyer, right? And let's say the lawyer, oh no, let's say your client is like, yeah, I need you to release that. If your client is telling us to release it, then we need to have an ROI on file, right? Release of information on file. If the court is telling us we need to send it, right? We don't necessarily need to have an ROI on file if we're getting court ordered by the judge, right? If it'll be nice if we can, but sometimes in real life that's not possible. But in any cases that we can, you want to see if we can get a release of information on file when it comes to getting this kind of stuff, right? So to be clear, because I don't want to confuse you, to be clear, with the court ordered, right? If the court is saying we need to send the information, we have to send it. We try to disclose the most minimal amount of stuff that we can, but sometimes that's not possible. So we got to release it. If the question talks about, hey, getting legal advice, that's always going to be a good answer, but that's not always an option all the time. But anything court order, we got to send. If it's by a regular lawyer, then we can assert privilege if that's what our client wants us to do. If our client says, no, I need you to send it, then we need to get a release of information on file. So that way we can send the information for them. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Informed consent. There's a lot of questions about informed consent on this test. A lot. You need to understand what that is, right? Informed consent looks like when you are talking about the limits of whatever you're doing with the client, your client's rights to not get treatment. Okay, you want to talk about confidentiality, what that looks like. All those things. You just want to make sure you understand what informed consent is for your client, so that way when they ask questions, you don't get confused. When it comes to confidentiality and talking about clients, we never, ever, ever want to talk about clients in public, on social media, or without consent. And when that last part about without consent, that's talking about when you go to like a consultation group or some type of supervision or something like that. If you're an associate licensed person, you are supposed to let your clients know that you're associate licensed and you have a supervisor that's going to be reviewing your cases with you, right? That's supposed to be given in the very beginning when it comes to treatment, so people know. They're not like, why are you talking about my case with somebody, right? No, you need to let people know I'm associate licensed. I'm going to be talking about your case with my supervisor, right? The social media part. So with social media, you want to be very careful with what you say online. A lot of people have public platforms, right? You can break confidentiality by talking about your client, even if you don't say their name, right? If you are talking about your client, right, and you're saying like, oh, I have this client that X, Y, and Z, and blah, 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 and your client comes across your page and they're like, whoa, they're talking about me, you can be in big trouble. Okay. We're not supposed to do that. Don't do that. If you have been doing that online, stop doing that now. Okay. Cool. Like I said before, for the exam, client safety overrides confidentiality. Client safety overrides everything. And what that would look like in a question is like, your client, let's say, was in a hospital and they, let me see, let me give a good example. Client safety overrides confidentiality. Let's say you have a client that they got in a car accident and they no longer can speak, and you are their social worker, you're the therapist, and they're trying to, and you're the last person's number in their phone, and they're trying to get information about like the client, their family, all those kind of things, right? In those kind of situations, if your client cannot speak, right, and this is a life or death or an emergency kind of situation, then you can break confidentiality for those kind of things. That's it. That's it, right? That's an extreme situation, and I highly doubt that's not I highly doubt that's going to be on your exam, but just something that you should know in real life. Like I said before, written consent. You always want to get written consent before you release anything, right? You always want to get that. So next we have dual relationships. I want y'all to remember, we want to avoid dual relationships at all cost, right? We want to avoid dual relationships at all costs. Okay. Avoiding dual relationships, it helps us reduce the risk of exploitation or impairment of our professional judgment. It is hard to be impartial. It is hard to be unbiased when you have a dual relationship with someone, right? Sexual relationships, we never do that. It's unacceptable. We're not doing that. If any question ever talks about having a sexual relationship with the client, you know for sure that is not going to be the answer. We never, ever, 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 ever do that. Okay. When it comes to former clients and relationships, we try our best to not do that, but there are certain circumstances where you may have to be in community with this person. For example, if you live in a very small town and there's one church in that town, and you and your past client, or you even your current client, go to that church, you where are you going to go? There's only one church in your town, right? So what you want to do, you just want to try to avoid, right, contact. If it's a current client, you want to talk about that boundary at church if it comes up that you all know each other and see each other, right? We do not provide services for friends or people that we supervise, right? If we have a supervisee and they're like, oh, hey, come do therapy for me and my family. Absolutely not. We don't do that, right? I want you all to think in your brain. Avoid dual relationships at all costs. There's only certain circumstances like living in a small town, you being the only social worker there, that you will you will be able to do that, but you want to try to reduce harm or minimize harm as much as you can, and you want to document the reason, right? If you're living in a small town and you're the only social worker and you have to see let's see, two people that are currently in a relationship, right? You want to talk about why in your notes, like, hey, these two people, actually you wouldn't even put that in your note, honestly, but you just want to document that that there's a conflict of interest or there's a dual relationship there. So please remember, avoid it at all costs. All costs. I hope that sticks in your brains. Avoid it at all costs. We don't have sexual relationships with clients, right? We also don't have friendships with clients, right? Like, even if the client leaves, we haven't seen them in like 3 years, we're not going to say, oh man, yeah, let's just be besties. Add me on Facebook, add me on TikTok. Absolutely not. Something else that's important when it comes to the exam, professional boundaries. You need to know what that looks like. Maintain them, right? Be clear. Avoid any kind of entanglements, right? Any of any kind, financially, right? Romantically, personally. We don't want to do that. You want to be very stern and clear with your boundaries with your clients. When it comes to gift and bartering, right? So we don't accept gifts, right? Or bartering services unless that is what's being done in that town. And then when it comes to the gift stuff, it has to be something like culturally necessary. So like, let's say if a client's like, oh, in my culture, these kind of hats are really important. They mean X, Y, and Z. Let's say it was very inexpensive or something that was handmade, then yeah, we can accept it, but we want to document why. Now, if a client saying, hey, I want to buy your iPhone, no, never that. Anything with money, no, we don't take it. Anything expensive, no, we don't take it. But if they made you a handwritten, handmade scarf or a portrait or something like that, okay, that you have more leeway with that. But most times we're avoiding gifts. We're not taking it. If it's not culturally necessary, we don't do it. Okay, so think about that. Also, too, like I said before, we don't abandon clients. Okay, we don't abandon clients, right? We terminate services when it's no longer needed for the client. Okay, um abandonment. So like I was saying before in one of the talking about um it something not being in your wheelhouse. So if you have a client, right, and let's say you've been working with them for a long time but it's not in your specialty, that's where we need to get training and consultation and things like that. But now, let's say we have a client that's not paying for services, right? Because this sometimes shows up. So I want y'all to listen very clearly. We have a right to get paid, okay? But the first thing we're going to do if a client doesn't pay, just say, you know what? You're done. You're clipped. We're not going to do that. We want to explore what's going on. If a client's not paying for services, is something happening? Did they lose their job? Are they literally just forgetting to change the card on file? Is there's something happening in their life, right? And then let's say they tell you and communicate like, oh, like, I lost my job, that kind of thing. If it's appropriate, right, you can offer that client a sliding scale, right? You can offer them to meet with an intern, right? But you don't want to just abandon the client because they can't pay. Now, if someone's choosing not to pay, right, we have a right to terminate, right? If we already explored what's going on, we had conversations with the client, right? If the question is talking about you met with this client, you've talked to them about the fee, they're just still choosing not to pay. They have no kind of self-harm or homicidal kind of ideation or anything like that, but they're just like, no, I don't want to pay. Like, I don't think I need to pay. Then you have a right to terminate. You don't have to work for free. Definitely not. And the code of ethics talk about we don't have to work for free, but we don't want to just abandon clients. And we wouldn't be abandoning someone if they're choosing not to pay for services, right? It's very different if a person loses their job and now you're like, okay, I'm going to give you a sliding scale because you lost your job, or a person loses their insurance, right? And now you're trying to work a fee that makes sense for you and them. That's very different than you just saying, oh, you didn't pay last week's fee, you're done, right? We don't do that, right? So you want to think about that. We don't abandon clients. Now, informed consent, let's get a little deeper into that. Your informed consent must include purpose, risk, benefits, and limits of services, right? Alternatives, rights to refuse or withdraw fees and payment exceptions, and then technology and telehealth. We live in a telehealth world now, so you want to make sure all that stuff is in your informed consent. Also, when it comes to minors, right? Depending on the state, and I know I made a practice question on my page about this, that in some states, right, minors can go and get services without their parent, right? So let's say you have a state that where a minor can go and get services, you don't need parent or guardian consent. Now, if you have a state where you need parent or guardian consent, then you want to make sure you get assent, right? That the minor wants to participate in these kind of services. That is something really, really important. And then you also communicate to them that they have a right to refuse, right? Like there are many times where minors come into therapy and they don't want to come in and their parent forces them. And, you want to talk about that with the client. Like, I'm here if you want to be here, right? I'm not going to force you to come and work with me. So you want to get that assent, like, hey, are they a willing participant to want to work with you? So yeah. So let's see. And then also if you have a person who has any kind of cognitive delays or anything like that, you have to get consent from the authorized representative, right? But you still want to get assent. You want to make sure that they want to participate. Next, competence and scope of practice. This comes up on the clinical exam so much, and you need to understand it. Okay, so we only provide services within our education, training, supervised experience, or licensure, right? When using a new model, we must have appropriate training and supervision / consultation. We seek consultation when unfamiliar with the population, issue, or treatment, right? You want to make sure you are honest and clear with your clients. There are times, right, where you might be working with someone for a while and something comes up that you don't know how to handle. You want to let your clients know, like, look, this is not in my wheelhouse. I'm actually currently doing training on this, right? And if you want to continue to work, we can work together, but being honest and giving that client the choice to say, if I want to work with you, or if I don't want to work with you. Okay. For purposes of the exam, you want to see, like, when the questions pop up and they're like, you don't have training, or it's an unfamiliar population, and it's a person that you've been working with for a long time, seek consultation. Now, if it's a person that this is your first session and you don't have any kind of relationship, then you can talk to them about referring them to someone who's a specialist in whatever they got going on, or someone that is more trained in what they got going on. Okay. Right. So when it's a lack of competence, right, we will consult, we'll refer out, or we will get training. We will not just wing it. Okay. Answers that are leading to winging it. Right? We don't do that. If you're a person, you've never worked with someone with substance use issues, you're not going to wing it, right? That is dangerous, right? We want to work within our competence and scope of practice, right? The test loves to test on that to see, do you know what to do? So cultural competence, we know that pops up so much, right? Something I want to say about cultural competence and diversity. You want to make sure you understand how race, culture, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and disability impact practice. You never, ever, ever, ever impose your own personal values on clients. You modify interventions to meet cultural needs, right? And as a person, right, when you are a culturally humble person, you are always engaging in self-reflection and education. You are aware of your own biases, and that's the place that you start. When you're working with a person that you are not really familiar with their culture or anything like that, you need to take time to go inside and see, what are my own biases and my own prejudgments when it comes to this. Okay, that's the first step. You need to say, ooh, what are my biases? Where may I be lacking? Where may I not have insight? Being a social worker, being a therapist, right? We want to always make sure that we are continuously reflecting, right? Doing that self-reflection and getting educated, right? Making sure that we don't come into a session with our own what's it called? With our own judgments, thinking like, oh, well, this person's from here, so this is what it means. Whoa, slow it down, right? Every person is different, even if people may share a similar ethnic identity, may look different for every person. So you never want to go into there thinking like you know it all, but you want to go in there more so being curious, right? And being able to be honest if you don't understand something, versus speaking in a way where you're trying to act like you're an expert on someone else's life. We don't do that. Okay. I talked about this before, the conflict of interest, we avoid it. We avoid it every single time. And if it arises, then we discuss, document, and resolve with transparency, right? Oh, another one that comes up on the test, the testimonials. We don't ask clients for testimonials. Do not do it. I know people do that in their real life. We do not do that, right? We're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to talk and ask clients, hey, write me a review on ZocDoc, or hey, do this. We don't do that. If a question talks about that, no, we are not doing that. Also, we're not responding to clients on social media. If somebody writes us a bad review, we're not going to say, hey, Mary, you're lying. Whoa, don't do that. We don't do that. We don't do that. Okay, please, please remember that. We don't do that. Like I was saying before, we avoid advancing any kind of personal, political, religious, or financial interest over our clients, right? The space that we have with our clients is not for us, it's for them. And you want to remember that. Okay, very big. And I know with what's going on in the world right now, I'm pretty sure they're going to start including more questions like that on the exam. So please, please remember that. When it comes to technology, right, you want to use secure platforms, right? Emails, text, including privacy disclaimers. Telehealth, there are questions where they talk about like working with someone, you want to verify where they live, right? Confirm their location to make sure that you are practicing within your license, right? If you're licensed in New York and your client is like, oh man, I'm in Miami, and you're not licensed in Miami, you can't be practicing there. Okay, unless you have a telehealth license for Miami. Okay, so that is something too, because they want to make sure that you know and you understand um, and you understand what it is. Um, what else? What else? Yes, that's I think that's all I want to say about technology and social media. Now recording, right? We always get um what's it called? We always get a release of information. We always get um sorry, not a release of information. I'm sorry. We always get consent for to record if our clients allow that, right? Because sometimes if you're an associate licensed person, you may need to record sessions to show your supervisor, or if you're a supervisor yourself, you may record to show your supervisees what a session looks like. So you want to make sure that if you're recording, everything's being documented. You got release from your patients, your clients, that they said it's okay. You want to retain records per state law or agency policy, right? But state law is always going to be agency policy every single time. Don't get your license taken away because your job is telling you to do something that the state doesn't tell us to do. So you want to make sure that you listen to that. And like I said before, if your patients request records, right, you want to make sure you're not releasing it if it causes any kind of harm, um, or limit access with explanation, and make sure that the request is in writing. Always request is in writing. Now, supervision, right? Supervisors, when you are a supervisor, you maintain competence, you avoid dual relationships, you document supervision, whatever you're talking about with your supervisee, you document it, right? And it's also important as a supervisee to document what your supervisor said, right? With consultation, consultation is used for client welfare, not gossip. When you are LCSW, you are engaging in consultation, not supervision. Remember that there's a difference. I discussed the difference in the beginning of the video, right? If you are impaired, burned out, using substance, illness, seek help, limit practice, right? There's a lot of questions that talk about that you are a social worker, you're burnt out. What's the first thing you need to do? You need to go talk to your supervisor or consult with someone. That's what you need to do, right? And then after you do that, then you may decide to take time off, whatever that is. But you don't want to engage in practice and you're burnt out, because now that can negatively impact the clients that you're working with. Okay, so remember that. Remember, supervision, we get that when we are an associate license. Consultation, we get that when we're fully licensed. And when we do consultation, we are fully liable for whatever choice we choose. When we get supervision, our supervisor and us are liable for what we choose to do. So I talked about duty to warn already. The name of it, what it tears off, duty to warn, to protect. Remember, it has to be identifiable victims, not just, I just wish people were gone. You need to know who, when, right? When they plan to do it. Mandating reporting, right? Child, elder, vulnerable adult population, right? Involuntary commitment. You want to know when we do that, right? So like I was saying earlier in the video, let's say we want a client has to do an involuntary hold in a psych unit, right? We only do that if the person is saying that they're going to end their life and they're not willing to live, right? They don't want to do a voluntary hold, because sometimes you can ask clients, right? Hey, okay, I noticed that you are feeling like you want to exit life. What if you go to the ER right now, right? Like, stay on the phone with me. Let's go to the ER right now, right? I want to make sure you get there, right? And, depending on your relationship with your client, they may listen and say, okay, that's a lot better than doing an involuntary hold, right? For a lot of folks, involuntary hold is traumatic, and depending on the population that you work with, sometimes when folks get an involuntary hold, when they come out, they try to do it, they try to end their life. That's a precursor to them trying to do it, and sometimes they succeed and end their life. So you don't want to look at, hey, voluntary hold as something that's going to save them. It's not, right? A lot of times it's just there as a safety precaution to kind of help with emotional regulation, and that way to kind of help them get to a place where they don't want to do that anymore, or the suicide ideation is less, and they can engage in treatment. SOAP notes, right? They talk about that all the time, knowing what a SOAP note is: subjective, objectives, assessment, and plan, right? Knowing what that looks like. Progress notes, right? termination and transfer of responsibilities, knowing what that looks like, right? How we terminate, you want to document. If you're terminating with someone because it's out of your scope of practice, right? Sending them referrals, things like that. Ethical use of self-disclosure, that's a big one, right? When we have sessions with folks, it's not about us telling them how much we relate to them and telling them our whole life story, but knowing when that can be helpful. You know, the rule of thumb in real practice, if you're trying to use self-disclosure, you got to ask, who's this benefiting? Is this going to benefit me or is it going to benefit the client, right? I've seen too many times where people will say that they have therapists that are disclosing like half of the session just talking about themselves. We're not supposed to do that. That is not helpful. But it may be helpful if you have a client and let's say that their parent died, right? And they're like, no one understands what that feels like. And this is just so terrible. And no one understands, blah, 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 blah. But you also, and you, if you feel comfortable, you may want to share that with your client. So that we're like, oh, okay, right? And like trying to relate and validate that it does suck and it does feel like people don't get it right unless you've experienced it. That may be really helpful for the client that you're working with. They may say, okay, you get me, you understand me, and that may help them open up a bit more. Let's see, a boundary management, like I said before, making sure you understand what boundaries look like, right, in private practice via telehealth, right? If you have a client that has a certain diagnosis that has a difficulty with boundaries, making sure that you answer the question that upholds your boundaries, right? Very, very important. So when it comes to answering the questions, you want to identify, right, what ethical issue is, and then you want to look and understand the code of ethics, right, and law regulations, and consider the like hierarchy, right? Like we want to keep people alive. We want people to have autonomy over their care. We want to reduce harm as much as we can. We want to maintain confidentiality as much as we can, and we also want to help people have a good quality of life. So safety is always going to come first, like I say in all my other videos. Safety. If someone's trying to exit life, we may have to break confidentiality. So, and like I was saying before, when you have questions, you want to sit down and ask yourself, what are they trying to test me on? Right? If this is an ethical question, what are they trying to see if I'm a competent social worker? Are they trying to see if I have integrity? Are they trying to see if I understand the importance of human relationships or the worth and dignity of a person? Are they trying to see service, like me working in ways that are promoting helpful services in the communities that I'm in? Like, what are they trying to test me on? I think if you can think about questions like that, it's going to be super, super helpful. Consultation, like I said, you consult, right? When you are fully licensed, you are consulting with other therapists. When you are associate licensed, you're getting supervision. Everything you want to document, right? And when you take action, you want it to be consistent with ethical standards and principles. So some high yield scenarios, right? Client reveals suicidal thoughts, safety overrides confidentiality, you do a risk assessment, safety plan, things like that. Former client asks to meet socially, boundary issue, we decline, right? Explain ethical limits. Supervisee discloses impairment, duty to ensure welfare of the client. So we address directly, provide resources, and report if needed, right? Client posts about you online, professional boundaries, don't respond publicly. We do not respond, right? You're not going to go on Google and a client says, oh my God, this was the most terrible therapist I ever had in my life. You're not going to say, hey, Billy, you're wrong, right? You didn't even come to sessions. Like, we're not going to do that. Court subpoena, right? So ethical focus is confidentiality. You want to seek legal consultation before releasing info if possible. And then client discloses abuse of a child. We have to mandate a report. We have to mandate report, right? Report immediately without proof. We don't need proof. We need suspicion. That's it. Okay, if we're wrong, that's fine. We'd rather be wrong than a client being abused and not get the help and something terrible happens. So now we're going to practice. I got a few questions here. I know this video has been long. I hope it's been helpful. I know I talk fast, so please just reduce the speed. I'm just trying to get through everything. So let's see. A client asks a social worker to write a letter for court attesting to their parenting capacity. The social worker has no direct observation of the client's parenting. What should the social worker do? Should it decline request, write based on client's self-report, obtain collateral data and write a summary, or provide a general character reference? So what should we do, right? When we think about our ethics, what is this trying to test on, right? If we're a social worker and we don't have any kind of training on what to write for parenting capacity, or that's not what we do, are we going to write a letter about that, right? We're not working in our scope of practice. We're not working in our competence, right? So we will definitely not write the letter, right? We will not write it based on the client self-report, because why would we do that? It needs to be what we directly observe. And if we have nothing that we've observed, we can't write about it. So the answer here, we're going to decline that request. Okay, let's see. Decline it. Actually, no, let's do this. Sorry. Highlight. Boom. Next. So we got a social worker feels emotionally drained and is missing sessions. What is the most ethical response? Continue seeing clients and self-monitor, take a break or reduce caseload after consulting with the supervisor, disclose to the clients about burnout, and leave the job immediately. Whoa. So we definitely don't do D, right? We're not going to just abandon clients because we're burnt out. Disclose to the clients about burnout. Why would we do that? Are we looking for sympathy? What are we doing here? We're not going to do that. Continue seeing clients and self-monitor? No, we already said we feel emotionally drained. We're missing session and is missing sessions. So the most ethical thing we should do is take a break and talk to our supervisor, right? We got to talk to our supervisor about what's going on. They may have insights. They may have things that can help us. And we need to take a break. That's what we need to do, right? So next, we have a child reveals physical abuse at home and asks the social worker not to tell anyone. What should the social worker do? Respect confidentiality, explain the duty to report and file a report, talk with the parents before reporting, report only if there are visible injuries. So what did I say before? We don't have to have physical proof, right? We just need to have suspicion. Number one. Number two, the client tells you they're getting physically abused at home, right? That's all we need to know, right? So these are situations where we need to break confidentiality and we need to explain to the client, hey, we got a duty to warn, we got to file a report. We don't need to call their parents first, okay? Calling their parents first, and it can make situations worse. If you are telling a parent like, hey, your child's saying that you're getting abused, that they're being abused at home, and they're actually abusing them, don't you think they're going to abuse them more? Don't you think something's going to happen if you call the parent and tell them that, right? So you need to explain duty to warn. Excuse me. You need to explain duty to warn and file a report. Okay. And we got another one. So a social worker uses a new trauma treatment learned in a brief workshop without formal training. What ethical principle is most at risk? So is it integrity, competence, service, importance of human relationship. So what I say, if you are doing something, right, doing a modality that you're not trained in, what's being impacted? We're not competent in that model. We're not practicing in our scope of practice. So the answer here is going to be competence. You're not competent. Why are you practicing in a model that you don't know, especially trauma treatment? You need to make sure you get training and consultation to be able to practice some of these higher end trauma treatment. So the answer here is going to be B. And lastly, a social worker posts a motivational quote on social media that includes a disguised client story. No identified information is shared. What ethical issue arises? None, since the details are disguised, violation of confidentiality, lack of informed consent, dual relationship risk. So what did I say before? When you are going online talking about your clients, even if you don't say their name, if they know that you're talking about them, you have broken and violated confidentiality. It's not informed consent. What is informed consent, right? Informed consent is talking about the risk, the right that the client has to leave sessions, like they don't have to do treatment, right? Talking about like the risk that they have when it comes to using telehealth or any kind of platforms or stuff like that, right? That's more so informed consent. But confidentiality is right. It's the confidentiality that the client is having treatment with you, and you are going online talking about them, right? So I always tell people you don't want to do that. It doesn't matter if you're not using their name or using a fake name. You can breach confidentiality by talking about them, and they can identify themselves. So the answer here is B. Okay. So I know this video was long. I don't even know how many minutes, but I know it was long. I hope it was helpful. I know I talk fast. If I talk too fast, just slow down the speed. But I wish you all the best of luck when it comes to studying these things, right? These are some high yield topics for ethics. I think I went over a lot, a good chunk of them. If you have any questions about anything I said, just send me an email or leave a comment on the video. But I wish you all the best of luck. Also, if you're interested, I also have a TikTok, right? It's called, what is the TikTok name? Wellness with IOA, where I talk about like exam questions and break down them on TikTok, but then also I also talk about therapy stuff with people that want to go into therapy and stuff like that. So if you're interested, you can see me on there, Wellness with IOA on TikTok. But yeah, so that's what I got for today. If you have any questions, you know what to do, but wishing you all the best. This is just a reminder, go and study.